Sometimes, the key to your future isn't something you earn, but something thrust upon you by a single act of courage. A scream in the night can become not an ending, but the most terrifying and beautiful beginning you could ever imagine. This is a story about a man who had nothing, who risked it all for a stranger, only to discover that the stranger held the key to everything he ever wanted for his family. We love seeing how far our stories travel, so please let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul, subscribe to our channel for more. The silence of the underground parking garage was a sacred thing, a thick, humming blanket that muffled the distant pulse of the city above. For Leo Sanchez, it was the sound of peace, the final exhale at the end of a 16-hour double shift. His movements were a familiar, rhythmic dance of exhaustion and duty, the squeak of his cart's wheels, the slosh of gray water in the bucket, the scrape of the mop against the grimy concrete. Each sound was a tick of the clock, bringing him 1 minute closer to home, to the two sleeping faces that gave his own tired face its meaning. He looked at his reflection in the dark-tinted window of a luxury sedan. A man etched with fatigue, his brow furrowed, not with anger, but with a permanent, low-grade worry. He saw a janitor. He saw a father. He had long ago forced himself to forget the man he used to be, the one whose hands were trained for breaking things, not cleaning them. That man was a ghost, buried under a mountain of diapers, bedtime stories, and unpaid bills. He was just Leo now, a simple man trying to build a quiet life on the rubble of a loud one. That's why the scream felt so wrong, so alien. It was a razor blade tearing through the sacred silence, a sound of pure, undiluted terror that didn't belong in his carefully constructed world. It wasn't just a shout, it was a soul being ripped apart. Every muscle in his body went rigid. The mop handle slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo the crack in the night's peace. The ghost inside him stirred. Leo didn't think. He reacted. The training he had spent a decade trying to forget surged through him like a jolt of electricity, sharpening his senses, flooding his weary limbs with a forgotten fire. He moved not like a janitor, but like a predator, his worn-out work boots silent on the concrete as he sprinted toward the source of the sound. He rounded a thick concrete pillar, and the scene unfolded under the cold, sterile hum of the fluorescent lights. A black, windowless van, its side door slid open like a gaping maw. Two men, clad in black, their faces obscured by ski masks, were shoving a woman toward it. She fought with a desperate, frantic energy, her slender arms flailing, her designer handbag falling to the ground and spilling its contents like a mechanical wound. Her heels scraped against the oil-stained floor as she tried to find purchase, her pleas muffled by a hand clamped over her mouth. Leo saw her eyes, wide with a primal fear that transcended wealth or status. They were the eyes of a cornered animal, and in that instant, she wasn't a stranger. She was every person he had ever failed to protect, every wrong he had sworn to make right. The first man looked up, his eyes widening in surprise above the black mask as he saw Leo approaching. "Get out of here, old man. This ain't your business." But Leo's eyes weren't on him. They were on the second man, the one holding the woman, his knuckles white as he twisted her arm behind her back. That was the fulcrum. That was the point of failure he had to break. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The humming lights, the distant city, the ache in his own back. It all vanished. There was only the threat and the mission. Protect. The first man lunged, a clumsy, telegraphed punch aimed at Leo's head. It was the move of a bully, reliant on size and intimidation. Leo swayed back, the fist whistling past his ear with an inch to spare. He didn't counter with a punch. He used his momentum, stepping inside the man's guard, his calloused hand shooting out to grip the man's wrist, while his other hand slammed into the pressure point just below the man's elbow. A sickening crack echoed in the garage, followed by a howl of agony. The man crumpled, clutching his now useless arm. The second assailant, startled, made a fatal error. He loosened his grip on the woman to reach for something inside his jacket, a weapon, a zip tie. It didn't matter. In that split second of opportunity, Leo moved. He shoved the woman away from the van, putting his own body between her and the danger. "Get back!" he roared, the voice not his own, but a gravelly command dredged up from his past. The second man charged, but Leo was already in motion, his body a coiled spring of controlled violence. He sidestepped the clumsy tackle, his foot hooking behind the man's ankle, and drove his shoulder hard into the man's chest. The attacker went down hard, the back of his head cracking against the concrete with a sickening thud. He didn't move again. Silence descended once more, but this time it was heavy, ringing with the aftermath of violence. The first man was groaning on the ground, cradling his broken arm. The second was unconscious. The woman was pressed against the cold concrete pillar, her chest heaving with ragged, panicked breaths. Her expensive silk blouse was torn at the shoulder, a smear of grease staining her cheek. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, were fixed on Leo, wide with a mixture of terror, shock, and a dawning, incredulous gratitude. Leo's own heart was hammering against his ribs, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a familiar, bitter taste in its wake. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the janitor slowly resurfacing, horrified by what the ghost had just done. He looked at his own hands, balled into fists, the knuckles already starting to swell. He had promised himself, promised his girls, that he was done with this. He had promised their mother on her deathbed. He flexed his fingers, forcing them to uncurl, to become the gentle hands that braided hair and checked for monsters under the bed. He turned to the woman, his voice softer now, laced with the fatigue that was his constant companion. "Are you okay, miss? Did they hurt you?" She just stared, her body trembling uncontrollably. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked sob came out. He took a half step toward her, then stopped, remembering the blood on the floor, the violence of the last 30 seconds. He was not a comfort. He was part of the nightmare. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. To him, she was just a victim, a fragile thing he had managed to keep from breaking. The signs of her world were all there, the impossibly expensive shoes, the diamond earrings that glittered like captive stars under the harsh garage lighting, the subtle, clean scent of a perfume that probably cost more than his monthly rent. But Leo didn't see the signs. He saw the trauma etched on her face, the way her perfectly manicured hands shook as she tried to pull her torn blouse together. He saw a person, broken and afraid. He backed away slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no further harm. "I'm calling the police," he said, his voice steady, a stark contrast to the chaos inside him. He pulled out his cheap cracked screen phone, his thumb hovering over the emergency call button. She finally found her voice, a raw, shredded whisper. "No, no, please. Not yet." Her plea was so strange, so unexpected, that it cut through his haze. "Miss, these men tried to kidnap you. They need to be reported." She shook her head violently, pushing herself off the pillar, stumbling on her high heels. "You don't understand," she breathed, her eyes darting around the empty garage as if the shadows themselves were listening. "The police. It would just make it worse. The press. They'll be everywhere. He wants that. He wants the attention." The word hung in the air. filled with a specific and terrifying meaning. This wasn't random. This was personal. Before he could process her words, the distant wail of sirens began to grow, a sound rising from the city's throat. Someone must have heard the commotion and called it in. The woman's face paled further, a new kind of panic seizing her. "We have to go. Now." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, you have to get me out of here." Leo was caught in a vortex of confusion. His instincts, the ones that told him to follow procedure, to be a good witness, were at war with the raw desperation in her eyes. He looked down at her hand, on his arm, then at the two downed men. Leaving the scene was wrong, but leaving her to face a new kind of predator, the flashing cameras and invasive questions she seemed to fear just as much as the masked men felt wrong too. The sirens were closer now, their cry echoing and amplifying in the concrete space. "My car," she said, pointing a trembling finger toward a sleek black coupe, parked in a reserved spot a few rows away. "The keys are in my purse." Leo made a decision. It wasn't logical. It wasn't by the book, but it felt right. He scooped up her fallen purse, retrieved a small, heavy key fob, and helped her toward the car, his arms supporting her as she limped. They slid inside, the smell of rich leather a stark contrast to the scent of antiseptic and grime on his work clothes. The engine purred to life with a quiet, powerful growl. As he pulled out of the parking space, the first police car, lights flashing, screamed into the garage entrance. They were gone before the cops even reached the scene of the crime. He drove in a daze, following her whispered directions, his mind struggling to catch up with the night's events. He was a janitor. He cleaned floors. And he had just fled the scene of a violent crime with a woman whose car was worth more than he would make in a decade. They ended up at a 24/7 diner, a small greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths and the comforting smell of old coffee and bacon. It was the kind of place that was invisible, a haven for the sleepless and the lost. She slid into a booth, wrapping her arms around herself, while Leo ordered 2 black coffees from a waitress who didn't give them a second glance. Under the diner's forgiving yellow light, he finally got a good look at her face. The grease smudge was still there, but beneath the fear, there was a breathtaking, almost impossible beauty. It was the kind of face you saw on magazine covers, on billboards that loomed over the city. And then it clicked. The honey-colored eyes, the distinct shape of her mouth, the cascade of dark hair. It was her, Serafina Vale, the biggest pop star in the world. A singer whose voice was a global phenomenon, whose private life was the subject of endless, ravenous speculation. He felt a wave of dizziness. The woman he had saved, the woman now sitting across from him in a cheap diner, was arguably one of the most famous people on the planet. Serafina watched him, her gaze sharp and intelligent despite the trauma she'd just endured. She saw the moment of recognition in his eyes, the subtle widening, the flicker of disbelief. She'd seen that look a million times before. It was usually followed by a request for a selfie, an autograph, or a fawning, awkward compliment. She braced herself for it, a familiar weariness settling over her. But he didn't say anything. He just pushed one of the coffee mugs toward her, his calloused fingers brushing against the cheap ceramic. "You should drink this," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of any awe or excitement. "It'll help with the shock." The simple human gesture threw her off balance. He wasn't looking at Serafina Vale, the icon. He was looking at a woman who was cold and trembling. For the first time all night, she felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and real. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. For everything. You saved my life." Leo just shook his head, looking down at his own hands resting on the table. "I just did what anyone would have done." Her laugh was a brittle, broken sound. "No," she said, her voice gaining a bitter edge. "You have no idea how untrue that is. No one has ever done something like that for me. Not without wanting something." The accusation, the deep, ingrained cynicism, hung in the air between them, a testament to the gilded cage her life had become. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome, splintered through Leo's mind. He wasn't in a diner. He was in a dusty, sun-baked desert thousands of miles away. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic tongue of fear. He was younger then, his face harder, his eyes holding none of the gentle weariness they did now. He was Sergeant Sanchez, a leader of men, a man trained to run toward a sound of chaos. He remembered the weight of the rifle in his hands, the grit of sand between his teeth, the responsibility for the lives of the young soldiers who followed him. He remembered the ambush, the sudden eruption of violence from a seemingly empty village. He remembered shouting orders, laying down suppressing fire, his mind a cold, clear machine of tactical decisions. He remembered seeing a young private, a kid named Miller, who couldn't have been more than 18, frozen in the open, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it was paralyzing. Leo had moved to help him, just as he had moved to help Serafina tonight. But he hadn't been fast enough. The memory of the explosion, the flash of light, the concussive force that threw him against a wall was as vivid as if it were happening now. He had woken up with ringing ears and a broken heart. Miller's dog tags clutched in his hand. He had survived. The kid hadn't. That failure had redefined him. It had sent him home a broken man, seeking a life of quiet atonement, a life where he cleaned up messes instead of creating them. He blinked, the harsh desert sun replaced by the soft glow of the diner. Serafina was watching him, a question in her eyes. He had a choice. He could tell her a half-truth, or he could offer a small, broken piece of himself. He chose the latter. "I wasn't always a janitor," he said, his voice low. "A long time ago, I was a soldier. I was supposed to protect people. I wasn't always good at it." The confession was bare, unadorned, and it changed the space between them. He wasn't just some random hero. He was a man with a history, a man who understood the weight of his actions. Serafina felt an unfamiliar stirring of trust. This man wasn't starstruck. He wasn't a sycophant. He was real, grounded in a world of consequences she could barely imagine. Her phone, rescued from her purse, buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a name, Marcus Thorne, her manager. Reality came crashing back in. "I have to call him," she said, her voice strained. "He'll be losing his mind." The call was short and tense. She spoke in clipped, professional tones, omitting the most violent details but conveying the urgency. Within minutes, the plan was in motion. A black SUV, far less conspicuous than her sports car, would pick them up. Her security team, led by a stern man named Graves, was already en route to the garage to manage the situation. The arrival of her world was as jarring as the attack itself. Two black SUVs pulled up outside the diner, sleek and silent. Several large men in dark suits emerged, their eyes scanning the street, their hands never far from their jackets. One of them, a mountain of a man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, opened the diner door. This was Graves, the head of her security. His eyes fell on Leo, and they were filled with a cold, professional assessment, sizing him up, judging him. "Miss Vale," Graves said, his voice a low rumble, ignoring Leo completely. "We need to get you to the safe house." Serafina stood, but she didn't move toward the door. She looked at Leo. "He comes with us," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Graves's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, We can't just bring in a civilian. We have protocols. Her gaze turned to ice. You and your protocols weren't there tonight, were you, Graves? He was. He is the only reason I am not in the back of that van right now. So he comes with us. Find a protocol for that. The challenge was clear. Graves, a man used to giving orders, was forced to back down. He gave a curt nod, his displeasure obvious, and gestured for them to follow. The ride to the safe house, a sprawling modern mansion hidden in the hills overlooking the city, was silent and tense. Leo sat beside her, feeling utterly out of place. His simple work clothes a stark contrast to the plush leather interior and the grim-faced security men surrounding them. He felt like a prisoner, not a guest. The mansion was beautiful, sterile, and cold. It was less a home and more a fortress of glass and steel. Marcus Thorne, her manager, was pacing in the cavernous living room. He was a man who seemed assembled from sharp angles and expensive fabrics, his face a mask of controlled panic. He hugged Serafina tightly, then immediately turned his frantic energy on Leo. Who are you? What did you see? Did you talk to anyone? Leo answered his questions calmly and concisely, his military training providing a strange anchor in this bizarre new reality. He recounted the events without embellishment, his report so clear and precise that even Graves looked at him with a flicker of grudging respect. It was during this debriefing that Marcus unveiled his audacious, insane plan. This is a PR nightmare, Sarah, he said, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. But it's also an opportunity. The stalker is getting bolder. The police reports, the restraining orders, they do nothing but fuel the media fire, which is what he wants. We need to change the narrative. We need to give them a different story, something so big, so shocking, it completely eclipses this. Serafina stared at him, her arms crossed. What are you talking about, Marcus? Marcus took a deep breath and looked from Serafina to Leo, a manic gleam in his eyes. You announce your engagement. To him. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Leo was sure he had misheard. It was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. Leo started to laugh, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. You're kidding, right? But Marcus's expression was deadly serious. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and urgent, directed at both of them. To the world, you are Serafina Vale, untouchable, unattainable. And you, he said, turning to Leo, are a mystery man, a hero who saved her from a violent attack. We spin it, a secret love affair. You've been seeing each other for months, keeping it quiet. Tonight, the stalker tried to get to her, and her brave, secret fiancé saved her. It's a fairy tale. It gives the world a story they want, and it provides a layer of protection. The stalker wants you to be alone and afraid, Sarah. This shows him you're not. This shows him you're protected, loved. It will drive him crazy, but it will also make him predictable. And it gives you, he said, looking at Leo, a reason to be by her side 24/7, not as a hired guard, but as her partner. It's the perfect cover. It was a plan born of desperation and media savvy, a cynical manipulation of emotion and narrative. But as Leo looked at Serafina, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not excitement, but a strange, calculated consideration. She was actually thinking about it. Another memory, this one softer, more painful, surfaced for Serafina. She was 22, freshly famous, and deeply in love. His name was Julian, an actor with a charming smile and eyes that promised a shared future away from the cameras. He had made her feel normal, seen for who she was, not what she was. She had trusted him completely, sharing her fears, her insecurities, the password to her private journals. A month later, excerpts from those journals, twisted and taken out of context, were the headline story in every tabloid on the planet. Julian had sold her out for a multi-picture deal in a fleeting moment of fame. The betrayal had hollowed her out, leaving behind a shell of distrust. Since then, every relationship had been transactional, every confidant to a potential Judas. She had built walls of steel and glass around her heart, just like the house she was now standing in. She trusted no one. But tonight, a stranger, a janitor with sad eyes and hands that knew violence, had put his body between her and a moving van. He had asked for nothing. He had not even recognized her. He had simply acted. In a world of Julians, he was an anomaly. And in his quiet strength, she saw a different kind of shield, one that no amount of money could buy. Maybe Marcus's insane plan wasn't just about PR. Maybe it was about survival. "I'll do it," she said, her voice quiet but firm, shocking everyone in the room, including herself. "But on my terms." She turned to face Leo, her gaze direct and unflinching. "This would be a job. I would pay you. I would make sure your family is protected. You and your children would move onto the estate, into the guest house. You would be safe. They would be safe. You would be with me at all public appearances. You would be my shadow, my shield. In return for your performance, I will give you enough money to give your daughters any life you want for them. No more double shifts. The best schools. A future." It was a business proposal, cold and clinical. A transaction. She was offering him a golden cage. Leo looked at this powerful, broken woman offering him a fortune to play a part. He thought of his tiny two-bedroom apartment, the constant worry about rent, and the cheap macaroni he fed his girls 3 times a week. He thought of their bright, curious minds and the failing public school they attended. He could give them the world, but he would have to lie to it. He would have to step back into a world of deception and performance, a world he had tried so hard to escape. He looked past Serafina, past the expensive furniture and the grim-faced security, and pictured Nina and Maya, their faces glowing in the light of the single lamp he left on for them as a nightlight. Everything he did for them. The innocent catalysts, Nina and Maya. They were 7 years old, identical twins with their late wife's warm brown eyes and a shared, mischievous smile. They were his world, the twin anchors that kept his ship from drifting into the darkness of his past. The thought of them, of their safety, was the only thing that mattered. These men who had attacked Serafina were professionals. They knew her routine. If they found out who he was, that he had interfered, they could come after him. They could come after his girls. The fear that shot through him was colder and sharper than any he had ever felt on the battlefield. Serafina seemed to read his mind. "They will trace you, you know," she said softly, her voice losing its businesslike edge. "The man who attacked me, the man who sent them, they will find out who you are. They will see you as a loose end. Your life, as you know it, is already over. The question is what the next one looks like. Alone and looking over your shoulder, or with us, protected." She was right. The quiet life he had so carefully built was already a casualty of his heroism. He had stepped out of the shadows for a moment to do the right thing, and in doing so had painted a target on his own back. He looked at Serafina, really looked at her, and saw past the fame and the fear. He saw a woman who was just as trapped as he was, just in a much more luxurious prison. There were 2 sides of the same coin. "Okay," Leo heard himself say, the word feeling foreign in his own mouth. "I'll do it. But I have conditions too." Marcus and Graves both looked surprised. The janitor was negotiating. "My daughters," Leo said, his voice hard as iron. They are not part of the story. They are not to be photographed. Their privacy is absolute. They will have their own security, people I approve of. And I don't want your money in a bank account. I want it in a trust, for them, for their future. I don't want a dime of it for myself. He was drawing a line in the sand. He would sell his time, his image, his name. But he would not sell his integrity as a father. A flicker of profound respect shone in Serafina's eyes. In a world where everyone had a price, he was naming his, and it had nothing to do with himself. Agreed, she said instantly, before Marcus could even object. Anything you need for them, they will have. And so the deal was struck. A lie was born in a glass house, a desperate pact between a lonely queen and a humble knight, a fiction designed to shield them from a very real monster. Leo felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step into thin air. He had no idea if he was about to fly or to fall. He just knew he wasn't going to do it alone. The next 48 hours were a blur of orchestrated chaos. Leo was taken to a high-end men's salon, where his rough, calloused hands were manicured, and his simple, short hair was styled by a man who called him darling and charged more for a haircut than Leo earned in a week. He was then put through a marathon session with a stylist, a severe-looking woman who clicked her tongue at his worn jeans and faded t-shirts before dressing him in tailored suits, cashmere sweaters, and shoes that felt too soft to be real. He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back, a polished, handsome man who bore little resemblance to the tired janitor he was. The clothes felt like a costume, the expensive watch on his wrist, a heavy, unnatural weight. Throughout it all, he was silent and compliant, his face a stoic mask. He was a soldier again, being issued a new uniform for a new, strange kind of war. This wasn't about him. It was about Nina and Maya. He repeated that to himself, like a mantra, a prayer to keep his own identity from getting lost in the charade. While he was being transformed, his daughters were carefully and gently moved from their small apartment to the sprawling guest house on Serafina's estate. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched cottage with a swimming pool and a garden, a world away from the cracked pavement and chain-link fence of their old playground. The first meeting between the girls and Serafina was a moment of supreme awkwardness and tension. Serafina, dressed down in jeans and a simple t-shirt in an attempt to appear approachable, knelt to their level. She, who could command the adoration of a stadium of 100 people, found herself intimidated by two 7-year-old girls with identical pigtails and questioning eyes. "Hello," she said, her voice a little too bright. "I'm Sarah. It's so nice to meet you." Nina, the more outgoing of the two, tilted her head. "Are you a princess?" "You live in a castle." Maya, the quieter, more observant twin, just stared, her gaze taking in the faint, lingering sadness in Serafina's eyes. Leo stood back, watching, his heart a tight knot in his chest. This was the moment of truth. If his girls were scared or unhappy, the deal was off. He would take them and run. Consequences be damned. Serafina smiled, a genuine, hesitant expression that softened her whole face. "Something like that," she said to Nina. Then she looked at Maya, who was still silently studying her. "What do you think?" Maya took a small step forward, her eyes serious. She didn't ask about the castle or the fame. She asked the one question that mattered. "Are you going to be nice to our daddy?" The simple, profound question hung in the air. It wasn't about the fake engagement or the money or the danger. It was about kindness. It was about the heart of the man they loved more than anything. Serafina was completely disarmed. She had been prepared for questions about her songs, her house, her life. But this raw, fiercely protective love for their father was something she had never encountered. It was so pure, so unconditional. She looked up at Leo, who was watching the exchange with an unguarded emotion on his face that made her chest ache. She saw the depth of their bond, the little universe of three they had created against the world. She realized then that her proposal, her job offer, had not just been to him. She had asked to enter their universe. It was a sacred, terrifying responsibility. She turned her full attention back to Maya, her own expression becoming as serious as the little girl's. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but absolute. "I am going to be very, very nice to your daddy. He was very nice to me. He's a hero." Maya seemed to consider this, her dark eyes searching Serafina's face for any hint of a lie. Then she gave a small, solemn nod of approval. She reached out and took Serafina's hand. Her small, warm fingers wrapped around Serafina's, and in that simple, trusting touch, a tiny seed of something real was planted in the barren ground of their fake arrangement. Nina, seeing her sister's approval, beamed and launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Serafina's neck in an enthusiastic hug. Caught off guard, Serafina stumbled back, but her arms came up instinctively to hold a small, warm body. Over Nina's shoulder, her eyes met Leo's, and for the first time they shared a look that wasn't about business or fear, but about a fragile, budding hope. Life in the gilded cage began. The days settled into a strange rhythm. Leo would spend hours with Graves and his team, being drilled on Serafina's schedule, security protocols, and the intricate details of their fabricated backstory. Where they met, a charity gala he'd supposedly catered. Their first date, a quiet walk on a private beach. The proposal, intimate, under the stars. It was a script, and he had to learn his lines perfectly. The rest of the time, he devoted to his girls, trying to maintain a sliver of their old normalcy amidst a surreal luxury. They swam in the pool, had picnics in the manicured gardens, and he read them bedtime stories in a room that was bigger than their entire old apartment. He was present, but his mind was often elsewhere, running through threat assessments and exit strategies. He was a bodyguard playing the part of a fiancé, and the strain of the dual roles was beginning to wear on him. He was hyper-aware of every sound, every unfamiliar car on the distant road. The ghost was never far from the surface now, always watching, always waiting. Serafina, meanwhile, threw herself into the public side of the arrangement with a professional zeal. She and Marcus crafted the perfect announcement. An exclusive interview with a trusted journalist, a carefully selected set of photos, one of which showed a stunning multi-carat diamond ring that had been delivered to the house by an armored car. The ring now sat in a velvet box, a heavy, sparkling lie waiting for its moment. The nights were the hardest. After the girls were asleep, a profound quiet would settle over the guest house. Leo would sit on the porch, staring across the lawn at the main house, a palace of light where Serafina was. He knew she was in there, likely as alone as he was. He felt a strange kinship with her, a connection forged in shared crisis and sustained by their mutual deception. He wondered what she was thinking, if she was as scared as he was. Sometimes he'd see her silhouette in a high window, a lonely figure looking out at the same night sky. They were two isolated people, orbiting each other in a universe of their own making. He was starting to see the woman behind the icon, the vulnerability beneath the polished veneer. He saw the way she lit up when his daughters showed her a drawing, the way she would listen, truly listen, when they told her a long, rambling story. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes when she came back from a grueling day of rehearsals or meetings, an exhaustion that mirrored his own. He was beginning to see her not as Serafina Vale, the celebrity, but as Sarah, the woman, and that, he knew, was a dangerous complication. This was a job, a mission. Emotions were a liability he couldn't afford. He had to keep his distance to remember the lines of their arrangement. One evening, a week into their strange cohabitation, Serafina walked across the lawn to the guest house. She was holding 2 mugs, steam curling from them into the cool night air. She found Leo on the porch, exactly where she had seen him on so many other nights. She offered him a mug. "Chamomile tea," she said. "My vocal coach swears by it. I figured you could probably use some." He took it, their fingers brushing for a brief second. A tiny spark of electricity. They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of the city. "How are you holding up?" she finally asked, her voice soft, stripped of its public bravado. He shrugged, taking a sip of the tea. It was warm and soothing. "I feel like I'm in a play, and I don't know my lines." She gave a small, sad smile. "Welcome to my life. I've been on stage for 15 years. The honesty of her admission created a new level of intimacy between them. This wasn't the boss and her employee. It was just 2 people, talking in the dark. "It must be hard," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Never knowing who to trust." Her smile faded. "You get used to it," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "Or you just stop trying. It's easier." This was the wound, the source of the deep-seated loneliness he saw in her eyes. The betrayal by her ex-lover, Julian, had been more than a heartbreak. It had been a fundamental reprogramming of her ability to trust. A memory surfaced for her, clear and painful. The morning the story broke, waking up to 100 missed calls, seeing her own private words she had whispered to Julian in the dark, splashed across a magazine cover in a grocery store checkout line. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, crawling sensation under her skin. The world saw her as a drama queen, an unstable starlet, but all she felt was a profound sense of violation, of being flayed open for public consumption. Julian's only response was a text message. "I'm sorry, it was a career move." That was the moment the walls went up. She had fired half her staff, cut off old friends, and retreated into a world where every relationship was managed by contracts and non-disclosure agreements. Love, she had decided, was a luxury she couldn't afford, a weakness a woman in her position could not have. She had built an empire, but she had built it in an empty castle, with only the ghosts of her past for company. She had everything, and she had nothing. Looking at Leo, with his quiet strength and his fierce, uncomplicated love for his children, she felt a pang of something sharp and painful. It was envy. He had so little, yet he was richer than she could ever dream of being. "My wife," Leo said suddenly, his voice thick with memory. She trusted everyone. She saw the good in people, even when it wasn't there. She used to say I was too cynical, that my training had made me see threats where there were only shadows. He looked out into the darkness. She was a nurse. She spent her life helping people, fixing them. One night, on her way home from a late shift, a drunk driver ran a red light. He fell silent, the unspoken words hanging heavily between them. She died instantly. The man who hit her, he was a kid, 19 years old. He was devastated, full of remorse. At the trial, his parents begged me for forgiveness. My wife, Maria, she would have forgiven him. But all I could see was a threat that had broken through my defenses and stolen the heart of my world. I haven't forgiven him. I don't think I ever can. He was sharing a piece of his soul, a shard of the pain that had shaped him. He was showing her the man beneath the soldier, the grieving husband beneath the stoic father. He was showing her that his walls were just as high as hers, just built from a different kind of brick. For the first time, Serafina didn't feel alone in her fortress. She realized he was in one, too. The day of the announcement arrived. It felt like a dress rehearsal for a battle. Marcus Thorne was a whirlwind of nervous energy, barking orders into his phone. A glam squad descended on Serafina, transforming her into the ethereal superstar the world expected. Another stylist worked on Leo, making sure his suit was perfectly tailored, his tie perfectly knotted. He felt like a doll being dressed for display. Before they went in front of the cameras for the interview, which was being held in the grand living room of the main house, Serafina pulled him aside. She was holding the velvet box with the engagement ring. "We need to do this now," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "For the cameras. They'll want a close-up." She opened the box. The diamond was obscene, a chunk of crystallized light that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. It was a beautiful, cold, and empty thing. "Leo," she began, her voice formal, as if she were reading from a script. She stopped, unable to say the pretend words of love. He saw the panic in her eyes. This was the part of the performance that was too real, too intimate. He gently took the box from her hands. "Let me," he said quietly. He took her left hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He didn't say anything. He just held her hand for a moment, his thumb resting on her pulse point, a silent, steadying gesture. He was anchoring her. He was telling her, without words, that he was there with her in this lie. The interview was a masterclass in performance. Serafina was radiant, spinning the web of their fabricated love story with a conviction that was breathtaking. She spoke of Leo's quiet strength, his humility, how he saw the real her, not the star. It was a lie, but it was threaded with kernels of truth, and that's what made it so believable. Leo, for his part, played the role of the strong, silent protector. He said very little, answering the journalist's questions with short, sincere-sounding statements. He spoke of his admiration for her talent, her kindness, her spirit. When asked about the attack, he simply said, "I did what any man would do for the woman he loves." The line, fed to him by Marcus, felt like ash in his mouth. But he delivered it with a stoic gravity that was utterly convincing. The world bought it. They didn't just buy it, they devoured it. The story exploded. It was the fairy tale of the century. The mysterious, heroic everyman who had captured the heart of the world's biggest star. The narrative had been changed, just as Marcus had planned. The stalker story was now a footnote to a grand romance. But in the quiet moments after the interview, when the cameras were gone and the house was silent again, the lie felt heavier than ever. The ring on Serafina's finger glittered under the lights, a beautiful, brilliant cage. Days turned into weeks. The public scrutiny was intense. Paparazzi helicopters sometimes buzzed overhead. Every time Leo took the girls out into the garden, a long-lens camera from a distant hill would try to catch a photo. But Graves and his team were ruthlessly efficient, creating a bubble of security around them. The happy couple had to make public appearances. Their first was a charity gala, the very kind of event where they had supposedly met. Walking onto the red carpet felt like stepping into a war zone of flashing lights. The noise was a physical assault. Leo, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, felt his old combat instincts flare. He saw every camera as a potential weapon, every shouted question as a threat. But he held his ground, his hand resting securely on the small of Serafina's back. He was her shield, and the world saw a man deeply in love and fiercely protective. Serafina, a vision in a glittering silver gown, leaned on him, both literally and figuratively. She had walked 1,000 red carpets, but this one felt different. For the first time, She didn't feel like she was walking it alone. The man beside her wasn't an actor paid to be her date, or a music executive there to network. He was just Leo. And his solid, steady presence was the only real thing in a sea of artifice. During the gala, a moment happened that shifted everything. They were seated at their table, surrounded by industry executives and famous actors, all of whom were fawning over the happy couple. An arrogant film producer, a man known for his predatory behavior, placed a hand on Serafina's arm and let it linger far too long, his thumb stroking her skin as he leaned in to whisper something in her ear. Serafina's smile tightened. Her body went rigid, a practiced, silent endurance of a casual violation she had dealt with her entire career. Leo saw it. He didn't cause a scene. He didn't say a word. He simply reached over, his hand covering the producer's, his grip firm but not aggressive. He met the man's eyes with a look of cold, hard granite. The message was unmistakable. The producer's smile faltered. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Leo then turned his attention back to Serafina, his expression softening as he asked her, "Are you all right?" It was a small moment, one that most people at the table missed. But Serafina felt it like a seismic event. No one had ever done that for her. No one had ever dared to challenge a man that powerful on her behalf, not even her own security. In that quiet, simple act of defense, he had protected her from a different kind of monster, the kind that didn't wear a ski mask. Later that night, as they rode home in the car, she reached out in the darkness and took his hand. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The public appearances continued, but something began to change between them. The lines they were supposed to be acting started to feel less like a script and more like the truth. The late-night talks on the porch became a regular ritual. They spoke of everything and nothing: his daughter's latest antics, her frustration with a new song, his memories of Maria, her dreams of one day living a quiet life. The fake backstory they had memorized was slowly being replaced by a real one, built moment by moment in the quiet hours when the world wasn't watching. The physical space between them also shrank. A shared glance across the dinner table, his hand on her back to guide her through a crowd, her head briefly resting on his shoulder during a long flight. These were gestures for the cameras, but they started to happen when no cameras were around. The lie was becoming comfortable, familiar. It was starting to feel like home, and that terrified them both. Leo knew he was falling for her, for the strong, vulnerable, brilliant woman behind the celebrity. He was drawn to her wit, her passion for her music, and the surprising, goofy laugh that she only let out when she was with him and the girls. And Serafina found herself falling for his integrity, his unwavering moral compass, and the gentle way he cared for his children. He was the anchor in her storm, the only fixed point in her spinning world. One afternoon, Maya, the quiet observer, found Serafina in the music room, staring at a blank page of sheet music, her expression frustrated and sad. Maya crawled up onto the piano bench beside her. "Daddy says when he's sad, he thinks about Mommy, and it makes him happy sad. He says it's better than just sad." Serafina looked at the little girl, her heart clenching. "What do you do when you're sad, sweetie?" Maya pointed to a crayon drawing taped to the wall, a bright, chaotic picture of 3 stick figures holding hands under a giant, smiling sun. "I draw a picture of me and Nina and Daddy," she said simply. "Because we're a team. Teams make you feel better." Serafina looked at the drawing, then back at the empty sheet music. She thought of Leo, of Nina, and Maya. She thought of their strange, fabricated life that was beginning to feel more real than anything she had ever known. She felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of inspiration. She picked up a pencil, and for the first time in months, the music began to flow. She wasn't writing a pop song for the charts. She was writing a love song, a real one. She was writing about a man with sad eyes and strong hands, about two little girls who taught her how to feel again, about finding a team in the most unexpected of places. It was the most honest song she had ever written. The relative peace was shattered by a single, chilling delivery. A package arrived, bypassing their formidable security. It was addressed to Leo. Inside was a single, high-quality photograph. It was a picture of Nina and Maya, playing on the swings in the park near their old apartment. It had been taken from a distance, a telephoto lens shot. The girls were smiling, oblivious. On the back of the photo, a single sentence was scrawled in neat block letters. "You can't protect 'em all the time." The blood drained from Leo's face. The stalker had found them. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't about Serafina anymore. It was about his children. The rage that filled him was a cold, black thing, an emotion he hadn't felt since the day he'd learned of his wife's death. He went to Graves, his face a mask of controlled fury. How did this get through? How did he get this picture? Graves was pale, his professional composure rattled. "I don't know. The photo is weeks old. He must have been watching you before any of this started. He knows who you are. He knows everything." The fairy tale had just turned into a nightmare. The monster wasn't just outside the castle walls. He had found a way to slip a message right into the heart of it. Serafina found Leo in the security office, staring at the photograph, his hands shaking with a rage so profound it was terrifying. When she saw the picture, she felt a wave of nausea. This was her fault. Her dangerous world had engulfed him and his innocent children. The guilt was suffocating. "Leo," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "I am so sorry." He looked up at her, and his eyes were not the gentle, sad eyes she had come to know. They were the eyes of the soldier, hard and lethal. "This is over," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'm taking my girls, and we are disappearing. You can tell the world we broke up. I don't care. I will not let him use my daughters to get to you." He was ready to burn their whole fabricated world to the ground to protect his family. And she couldn't blame him, but she knew it wasn't that simple. "Leo, you can't," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "If you run, he wins. He will have isolated me, just like he wanted. And he will hunt you. He will never stop. The only way we survive this is together. We have to draw him out. We have to end this, for all of us." He looked at her, his face a torrent of conflicting emotions. He knew she was right. Running was a temporary solution. The threat would always be there, a shadow hanging over his daughters' lives. He had to face it. He had to eliminate it. The ghost he had tried to bury for so long had to come out and finish the fight. The plan was risky, a calculated gamble designed by Graves, Leo, and a reluctant Serafina. They would use the upcoming premiere of a movie she had a song as bait. It was a massive, televised event, with a red carpet that would be swarming with press and fans. Security would be tighter than ever, but it would be public. It was the kind of high-profile event the stalker, an egomaniac who craved the spotlight, wouldn't be able to resist. The plan was to leak false information about a security weakness, a gap in their motorcade route, and a specific time when she would be vulnerable. It was a trap. They would draw the monster into the open on their terms. The days leading up to the premiere were agonizingly tense. The mansion was on permanent lockdown. The girls were kept inside, cared for by a pair of plain-clothed female security officers Leo had personally vetted. Leo and Serafina barely spoke. The easy intimacy they had built was gone, replaced by the grim reality of the coming confrontation. They were partners in a war, and the romance, real or fake, had been put on hold. Leo spent every waking moment with Graves's team, poring over schematics of the venue, memorizing escape routes, and running through combat simulations. He was no longer playing a part. He was Sergeant Sanchez again, preparing for the most important mission of his life. The night of the premiere arrived, thick with a sense of impending doom. Serafina was breathtakingly beautiful in a blood-red gown, a stark contrast to the fear in her eyes. Leo, in his tuxedo, looked like a movie star, but his eyes were constantly moving, scanning every face in the crowd, every rooftop, every shadow. As they stepped out of the armored car and onto the red carpet, the roar of the crowd and the explosion of camera flashes were disorienting. It was the perfect environment for an attack. Chaos, confusion, distraction. Serafina's hand gripped his arm tightly, her knuckles white. He leaned in close, his lips near her ear, his words meant for her alone. "I've got you. Stay with me. Do not leave my side." They walked the carpet, smiling for the cameras, a perfect picture of a glamorous power couple. But beneath the surface, it was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Every security guard, every police officer was on high alert. Leo's senses were on fire. He could feel the danger in the air, a static charge of imminent violence. He was a lightning rod, waiting for the strike. He felt the stalker's eyes on him, a malevolent, obsessive gaze from somewhere in the crowd. It happened just as they reached the entrance to the theater. A man, dressed as a credentialed press photographer, broke through the security line. He wasn't moving toward Serafina. He was moving toward Leo. In his hand wasn't a camera, but a long, wicked-looking knife. The chaos erupted. People screamed. Security guards swarmed. But the attacker was fast and brutally focused. He had ignored the bait. He wasn't after Serafina. He had come for the man who had taken his place, the man he saw as his rival. Leo reacted instinctively. He shoved Serafina behind him, a mirror image of his actions in the parking garage. But this time, the world was watching. He met the attacker's lunge, deflecting the knife hand with one arm, while his other hand delivered a single, brutally efficient strike to the man's throat. The attacker crumpled, gasping for air, the knife clattering to the red carpet. It was over in 3 seconds. But then a second man, a backup accomplice hidden in the crowd, pulled out a gun. Time seemed to slow down. Leo saw the barrel of the gun swing toward Serafina. There was no time to think, no time for a plan. He did the only thing he could. He threw his body in front of hers, becoming a human shield, bracing for the impact, for the searing pain he remembered all too well. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from the gunman. One of Graves's snipers, positioned on a nearby rooftop, had taken him down. The threat was neutralized. The entire, violent confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. In the ringing silence that followed the screams and the gunshot, Leo slowly lowered his arms. He turned to Serafina, who was staring at him, her face ashen, her eyes wide with a terror that was rapidly being replaced by a profound, earth-shattering realization. He had been willing to die for her. He had been willing to take a bullet for her. This wasn't an act. It wasn't a job. This was real. The carefully constructed walls around her heart didn't just crack. They crumbled into dust. All the cynicism, all the fear, all the pain from past betrayals were washed away in that single, selfless act. She saw him not as a janitor, or a soldier, or a fake fiancé. She saw him as the man who had saved her. In every possible way a person could be saved. She launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest, her body shaking with violent sobs of relief and a love so powerful it stole her breath. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, his own heart hammering against his ribs. The world, the cameras, the chaos, it all disappeared. In that moment, On a blood-red carpet, surrounded by the wreckage of their lie, they were the only two people on Earth. The aftermath was a media hurricane. The story of the heroic fiancé foiling a second, more brazen attack on his pop star lover was global news. The stalker, identified as a wealthy, deranged fan, and his hired accomplice were in custody. The danger, for now, was over. The next day, Marcus Thorne called for a press conference. The official plan was for Serafina to announce that, in light of the traumatic events, she and Leo were calling off their engagement to focus on healing, a clean and simple end to their public charade. It was the smart PR move. But as Serafina stood at the podium facing a sea of reporters, she looked over at Leo, who was standing just off stage, his face calm and supportive. He was leaving the decision to her. He would walk away if she wanted him to, back to his quiet life, his mission complete. She looked at the enormous diamond on her finger, the symbol of their lie. And she knew she couldn't do it. She couldn't end the one true thing that had come into her life. She took a deep breath and walked to the microphone. "I'm not here to announce the end of my engagement," she said, her voice clear and strong, silencing the room. "I'm here to tell the truth." She told them everything. Not the whole truth about the fake engagement, but a version of it that was emotionally honest. She told them about the lonely, fearful life she had been living. She told them about a night in a parking garage when she thought she was going to die. And she told them about a kind, decent man, a father, a veteran, a janitor, who had saved her life without knowing who she was. She told them how his quiet strength and integrity had shown her what it meant to be truly protected, truly cared for. "The world knows him as my fiancé," she said, her eyes finding Leo's. "But I know him as the man who taught me how to trust again. The man who showed me that true love isn't a fairy tale. It's about standing in front of someone and being willing to take a bullet for them." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "Our relationship didn't start on a red carpet. It started in the dark, in a moment of crisis. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I love him, and that is the only truth that matters." She turned and walked off the stage directly to him and kissed him, a real, passionate kiss, in front of all the flashing cameras. And for the first time, it wasn't a performance. It was a promise. Months later, the world had moved on to its next story. The noise had faded. The life they lived now was a quiet blend of their two worlds. They didn't live in the cold glass mansion anymore. They had bought a sprawling but comfortable home in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a place with a big backyard and a strong fence, a place where Nina and Maya could ride their bikes on the sidewalk. Serafina still made music, but she had scaled back her touring. Her priorities had forever changed. Her new album, the one she had started writing on that piano bench next to Maya, was being hailed as her masterpiece, a work of raw, emotional honesty that critics and fans adored. The love song, simply titled Team, was her biggest hit to date. Leo never wore a tuxedo again unless he absolutely had to. He had accepted a position as the head of Serafina's new philanthropic foundation, an organization dedicated to helping veterans and their families. He had found a new way to serve, a new mission. He was no longer a ghost, hiding from his past. He was a man who had integrated all the parts of himself, the soldier, the janitor, the father, the husband. He had found his peace. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Leo was in the backyard, pushing Nina and Maya on the swing set. Serafina came out of the house, carrying a pitcher of lemonade. She wasn't wearing designer clothes, just old jeans and one of his faded t-shirts. Her hair was in a messy ponytail, and she wore no makeup. She had never looked more beautiful to him. She leaned against the oak tree, watching him with his daughters, her face filled with a serene, profound happiness. He stopped a swing and walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The girl's laughter was the only soundtrack. "You know," he said quietly, his lips against her temple, "when I first met you, I thought you were from a different planet." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was," she said. "You and those girls, you brought me back to Earth." He looked at his daughters, their faces bright with joy, then back at the incredible woman in his arms. The man who cleaned floors and the woman who commanded stadiums. Their life was improbable, impossible, but it was real. They had forged a family not out of a fairy tale, but out of the messy, terrifying, beautiful truth of who they were. They had saved each other,